Privileges are over, my husband shouted, saying we'd manage separate budgets. I agreed, knowing he'd regret it. Sunday in-laws arrived and my mother-in-law screamed so loud even neighbors ran out. You know that moment when your whole world just shatters? When someone you love, someone you built a life with, looks you dead in the eye and delivers a gut punch so cold, so calculated, it changes everything. That's exactly what happened to me, Marianne, one Friday night, and honestly, you won't believe what came next. It was after spending hours in the kitchen, meticulously preparing a 3-course dinner for my husband Leonard's parents. The house smelled incredible, candles were lit, everything was perfect. And then he just looked at me. With that unnerving ice-cold calm he has, he declared that my comfortable life at his expense was over. Just like that. His exact words. In the very living room we bought largely with my inheritance from Grandma Teresa. I can still hear his tone, devoid of emotion, as if he were signing a contract, not tearing apart the foundation of our marriage. Some humiliations don't hit you immediately. They don't land like a slap. They seep in like a slow, silent poison, paralyzing you before you even realize you're dying. Have you ever felt utterly invisible in your own home? Like everything you pour your heart into just doesn't count? It's soul-crushing. And the worst part is, you start to normalize it bit by bit until one day something just snaps. Believe me, you do not want to miss what happens when a woman finally gets tired of taking it all and decides it's time to send her invoice. It all started the moment his parents, Veronica and Mr. Charles Bennett, finally left. Every other Friday it was their royal visit. For me, it meant at least 6 hours of intense cooking, scrubbing, arranging flowers, making sure every single corner of the house was impeccable. All so Veronica could conduct her white glove inspection and deliver one of her signature passive-aggressive jabs about my little graphic design hobby. She loved to say it was nice I had something to keep me busy, as if my actual paying job wasn't, well, real work. That evening, the conversation had turned to how we'd managed to buy such a beautiful house, just outside New York City. Leonard, chest puffed out like a proud peacock, went on and on about his hard work, his vision, his wise investments, conveniently omitting that the vast majority of the down payment came directly from my inheritance. The second that front door clicked shut behind his parents, he spun around. That arrogant, smug smile I've always secretly despised was plastered across his face. "Sweetheart," he purred, "starting with the next payment we'll have separate budgets. Your comfortable life at my expense is officially over." He said it with the quiet confidence of a man who truly believed he held all the cards, expecting me to crumble, to beg, to cry. But all I felt was this strange, electric chill down my spine. His words hit me like a revelation, a truth that had always been lurking just beneath the surface, finally laid bare. I was the one often working until 2 a.m. on my tablet, designing logos, editing videos, turning out freelance projects for my clients. I was the one managing the household accounts, doing the shopping, paying the bills, meticulously decorating every single room with my taste and, more often than not, my money. Every single Sunday I cooked feasts for his parents, appetizers, main course, dessert, only to endure Veronica's barely veiled criticisms about the sauce or the way the meat was cooked. To them, all of that was invisible. It was simply my duty as a wife, something expected, never appreciated. My financial contributions, even if they were irregular, were dismissed as a whim. And my inheritance? Just dumb luck that didn't count. Something Leonard conveniently chose to forget. In that moment, everything became agonizingly clear. He didn't see me as his partner. He saw me as a luxury employee, a woman he was generously supporting. I remember the first time that feeling of invisibility truly sank in. It was during our very first Sunday lunch in this house. I'd spent 2 full days preparing a roasted pork using Grandma Teresa's recipe. I was so excited, so proud, so desperate to please. When Veronica took her first bite, she simply said, "It's a bit dry. Next time, let me supervise you so it turns out better." Leonard said nothing. He just looked down, kept eating, and gave his mother a faint, approving smile. That day I knew. Every Sunday would be a test where I was destined to fail. My kitchen, my creative space, my refuge had been transformed into a courtroom, and I was always the accused, never allowed to speak in my own defense. The beautiful quartz countertop I'd chosen and paid for with my own money seemed to mock me, a silent witness to my ignored efforts and growing resentment. So when Leonard threw that phrase at me that Friday, I could see in his eyes exactly what he was expecting. A scene. His stiff posture, the way he clenched his jaw, everything screamed that he was ready for a confrontation. He wanted my tears, my anger. The same old fight that always ended with him playing the magnanimous, powerful man, setting boundaries. I'm sure he already had his pre-rehearsed speech ready about financial responsibility and how it was all for our own good. He wanted to reaffirm himself as the sole provider, the head of the household, a role his parents had relentlessly drilled into him. But that night, the woman he thought he knew, the one who stayed quiet through every criticism and tried desperately to please everyone, was gone. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't a planned decision, not really. It was like a spark igniting deep within my mind. All the pain, all the years of humiliation, all of it condensed into one single razor-sharp idea. The frantic voices in my head, the ones trying to justify him, to understand him, to blame myself, they all went silent. All that remained was an absolute stillness. A powerful, terrifying, and utterly liberating silence. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a very long while, I didn't see the man I'd fallen in love with. I saw a stranger acting out a role his mother had written for him. And in that silence I found my answer. To his complete and utter surprise, I smiled. It wasn't forced, it wasn't sarcastic. It was real. Calm. Almost a relief. I looked up and said softly, "Excellent idea, darling. It's about time we had some financial clarity." His reaction was priceless, almost comical. He just stared at me, mouth half open, completely unsure if I was serious or mocking him. He blinked several times, genuinely confused, while I held my tone steady and confident. There would be no war that night, no tears, no drama. Instead, I offered him my most potent weapon. My composure. I picked up my tablet from the coffee table, the very one where I spent hours working, and turned it on. The soft glow of the screen lit up my face. "Let's start," I said. "How about we make a list of shared and individual expenses? That way, everything will be ready for the next payment cycle. I want this to be fair for both of us." His confusion slowly morphed into something close to fear. He wasn't prepared for that. Not for my calmness, not for my sudden, unsettling efficiency. He wanted drama, a spectacle. I gave him a business meeting. And in a matter of seconds, the power shifted. He didn't even notice. That night, while Leonard slept soundly beside me, I couldn't close my eyes. My tablet rested on my lap, but I wasn't working for a client. I was working on something infinitely more important. My escape plan. I meticulously made a detailed list of every single household task I did. Meal planning, grocery shopping, cleaning, budgeting, coordinating, maintenance, decorating. Every single invisible job that kept our entire life running smoothly. Next to each task, I looked up how much people in New York City charged for those exact same services. A personal chef, a professional housekeeper, a household manager, an event planner. The numbers added up one by one until they formed a truly shocking total. That's when I knew with absolute certainty exactly what I was going to do. My plan for Sunday lunch began to take shape. A plan both beautiful and terrifying. The clarity Leonard claimed he wanted was about to arrive. Just not in the way he imagined. On Saturday morning, the house felt different. The air was still, heavy with a quiet tension. There were no clattering pots, no enticing smell of spices, no frantic rush of me trying to make everything perfect. Leonard came downstairs, clearly expecting to find me in the kitchen, perhaps regretful, perhaps worried. Instead, he found me sitting calmly on the patio sofa, a cup of coffee in my hand, my tablet on my lap. He stared, silent, waiting for me to speak first. I looked up and smiled, a perfectly serene smile. "Good morning, darling," I said. "I slept wonderfully." His face was priceless. He understood nothing. Peace had become my new weapon, and he had no defense against it. He didn't realize that the woman he had humiliated the night before no longer existed. In her place was a strategist who had spent the entire night calculating the exact price of her freedom. All day he tried to provoke me, throwing out comments about how nice it must be to enjoy my day off, as if he didn't know my weeks were filled with endless work and sleepless nights. While I was deeply focused on one of my designs, he walked behind me and said, his voice dripping with mockery, "Good thing you have time for your little drawings." Each word from him just opened a deeper chasm between us. In the past, phrases like that would have stung, made me feel guilty or lazy. But now, every comment was just another line item in the mental invoice I was drafting. I listened without reacting, nodded with a calm serenity that I knew was driving him absolutely crazy. And in my mind, I just added an extra charge for emotional damages. He didn't realize he was no longer talking to his wife. He was talking to a service provider about to hand him her bill. His arrogance was the fuel feeding my new determination. That afternoon, I went to the grocery store, but it wasn't the usual weekend shopping trip. There were no pork ribs for his father, no expensive wine his mother loved, no ingredients for those elaborate family feasts. This time, I walked the aisles with a completely different purpose. I bought Greek yogurt just for me. A beautiful salmon fillet, avocados, blueberries, and the specialty coffee I truly loved. Every item I placed in the cart was a silent declaration of independence. At the checkout, I paid with my own card and felt a small but powerful rush of satisfaction. It was the first time in a long, long while that I had bought food purely for me. For my taste, my health, my needs. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like the very first step toward reclaiming my space, not just in the house but in my life. When I got back and started putting away my groceries, I stood for a moment just looking at the kitchen. That dream kitchen, with its elegant veined white quartz island and gleaming stainless steel appliances, was my pride and joy. I had designed it myself, chosen every single detail from the cabinet handles to the lighting. And, most importantly, I had paid for it with a large portion of the money Grandma Teresa left me. I remembered what she told me the day she gave me the inheritance papers. "It's for you to build your independence, sweetheart. Not anyone else's. And not out of guilt." A wave of guilt formed in my chest as I thought about how I had betrayed her, how I had allowed my investment to become the stage for my own servitude. But that guilt quickly solidified into a decision as firm and unyielding as steel. I would honor her memory. And that kitchen would become the place where my independence was reborn. As the sun began to set behind the soaring buildings of New York City, a whisper of doubt tried to creep into my mind. I sat on the porch wondering if I was being too drastic. Maybe I should talk to him, try one more time to make him understand. But then, like a cold ghost, last Christmas came back to me. I had spent 3 days cooking for 20 of his relatives. I was exhausted but satisfied. Until I heard Veronica whisper to her sister, "Poor Leonard. He works so hard while Marianne just plays house." No one, not a single soul, defended me. Leonard, standing right beside her, just smiled. That memory obliterated any lingering hesitation. No, I wasn't being drastic. I was being fair. For the very first time, I was putting myself first. That Saturday's dinner was a truly bizarre scene. I ordered a delicious salad from a nearby restaurant just for myself. Leonard looked at me, waiting for me to offer him some, but I didn't. He quietly got up and made himself a sad, lonely ham and cheese sandwich with the oldest bread he could find in the pantry. We ate in a heavy, oppressive silence, broken only by the clinking of silverware. He clearly expected me to speak first, to find the quiet unbearable, to finally break down crying or yelling. But I savored every bite of my salad with a calm that felt entirely new, tasting the flavor of my own self-assertion. He had asked for separate budgets and clear rules, and I was giving them to him to the letter. What he didn't understand was that his attempt to control me had, in fact, set me free. The cage he built for me had opened, and I was learning to fly again right inside my own home. Sunday morning arrived with an eerie, almost sacred peace. I woke up early as always. But instead of rushing to the kitchen to marinate meat or prepare dessert, I made myself a cup of tea and went out to the patio to read. The city sunlight slowly started to warm the air, and the house was utterly silent. There were no clanging pots, no comforting smell of frying garlic, only the gentle bird song and the soft whisper of the breeze. For the first time in many, many years, a Sunday morning didn't feel like the start of another unpaid workday. It felt like what it was supposed to be, a day of rest. I felt a deep, profound peace, the kind that only comes when you know you're about to reclaim what's rightfully yours. Leonard eventually came downstairs around 9 a.m. His eyes scanned the spotless, empty kitchen, and a distinct line of worry appeared on his forehead. "Don't tell me you're not cooking. My parents are coming at 1. He blurted out, his voice almost childish, like a kid afraid his birthday party was about to be cancelled. I looked at him over the top of my book and replied as naturally as if we were discussing the weather. "No, sweetheart. Sunday lunches were part of my household management services. And since we now have separate budgets, that service comes with a fee. If you'd like to hire me, we can discuss the rates." His expression shifted rapidly, from confusion to disbelief, then to barely contained anger. I could almost hear the gears in his head turning frantically, desperately trying to find a way to regain control. But I no longer played his game. A few minutes later, his phone rang. Of course it was Veronica. I could hear him from the living room, speaking in a low, tense voice. "His mom. Everything's fine. Yes, of course. Something simpler today. A surprise." I could almost taste the falseness in his tone, the raw panic hidden beneath it. The man who always bragged about being in control, the provider and head of the family, was now trapped in his own pathetic web. He hung up and looked at me with a fury I had never seen before. "Fix this, Marianne," he ordered, his voice no longer arrogant but tinged with desperation. I simply shook my head. "I'm sorry, Leonard. You set the rules." With a calmness that even surprised me, I picked up my tablet, the same one he always dismissed as my little drawing toy. I opened the spreadsheet app where I had drafted my plan on Friday night, and created a new document with a clean, professional design, just like the ones I present to my best clients. At the top, in bold, I wrote, "Invoice for cooking and household management services." I began breaking down the costs: menu planning, purchasing quality ingredients, preparation and cooking, 6 hours of labor at the rate of a private chef, table service and cleanup. Each line had a clear value, based on real market prices in New York City. The total was beautiful, neat, round, and absolutely fair. My work tool had just become the instrument of my own justice. When the clock finally struck 1, I calmly walked to the refrigerator. I took out the salmon, avocados, and vegetables I had bought for myself. With steady, deliberate movements, I began preparing my own lunch. At the same time, I grabbed a roll of labels and a marker. I opened the Greek yogurt and wrote on a label, "Property of Marianne." I did the same with my specialty coffee, my fruit, and my bottle of wine. It was a small, almost absurd gesture, but one bursting with meaning. I was drawing a line not just in the fridge but in our lives. He wanted separation and I was giving it to him in the most literal way possible. I could hear his restless footsteps pacing through the living room, the rhythm marking time until the inevitable moment. The doorbell was about to ring and I was ready. The show was about to begin. At exactly 1 p.m. the bell rang. A sharp, cutting sound that sliced through the silence of the house like a knife. Each vibration ran down my spine, not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating sense of anticipation. It was the signal, the moment I had been preparing for. I watched Leonard practically leap from the sofa as if jolted by electricity. His face, pale and slick with sweat, was a map of raw panic. He ran to the door, frantically smoothing his shirt, trying to plaster on a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was about to play his usual role. The perfect husband, the devoted son, the confident host, the illusion of a happy family, the man of the house. Without realizing that the very foundations of his carefully constructed castle were about to collapse. From the calm of the patio, my coffee still warm in my hand, I felt like I was watching a play unfold. I was the director and he, poor thing, was the tragic protagonist, utterly unaware that he was about to face his final act. The moment he opened the door, his transformation was instant. His voice became loud, artificially cheerful. That rehearsed tone I knew so well. "Mom, Dad, welcome. Come in, please." Veronica and Mr. Charles Bennett walked in with the self-assured confidence of people who truly felt they owned the place. Veronica wore a flawless white linen suit that probably cost more than my last design invoice. She immediately scanned the room looking for me, and when she didn't see me, she lifted her chin in disdain. "How strange," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "It doesn't smell like anything today. Usually you can smell the roast pork from the entrance." Mr. Bennett, as always, remained silent, but his eyes swept the living room, subtly noticing the stillness, the absence of the usual bustling activity that always signaled their arrival. The first stone had been thrown and I hadn't even moved. Leonard, sweating visibly, tried desperately to distract his parents. "Today I wanted to give you a surprise, something different. Why don't you sit in the living room? Can I get you something to drink? A glass of wine? Maybe whiskey?" His attempt to act like the perfect host was pathetic. He never served the drinks. That had always been my job. Veronica ignored him completely and set her designer purse down on the sofa I had chosen and paid for. Her goal was crystal clear and she wouldn't be distracted by a mere drink. "First, I'll go to the kitchen to see if Marianne needs help. She's probably overwhelmed by the surprise she prepared." The word, surprise, dripped with venomous sarcasm. To her, I was utterly incapable of doing anything right without her supervision, and she couldn't wait to find a mistake, any excuse, to reassert her supposed superiority. With the determination of a general inspecting her troops, she headed straight for the kitchen. Leonard tried to stop her, placing a desperate hand on her arm. "Mom, really, there's no need. I'll take care of it," he pleaded, his voice cracking. She brushed him off impatiently, like swatting away a bothersome child. "Don't be ridiculous, Leonard. I know your wife. She probably needs help." And without waiting for an answer, she marched toward the hallway. From my seat on the patio through the glass door, I had a perfect cinematic view of the unfolding scene. I saw Leonard's stiff back, his shoulders slumped in helplessness. I felt no pity for him. What I felt was a strange, almost pleasant calm. It was poetic justice. He had unleashed this storm with his arrogance, and now he would have to face the hurricane he himself had summoned. His mother. The serenity that filled me was so deep, it almost felt supernatural, the peace of knowing that for the first time, the entire script was entirely in my hands. It was in that brief moment of silence just before the storm that I heard the sentence that utterly sealed my decision. Mr. Bennett, who had stayed behind near the door, approached his son and asked quietly, "Everything okay, son? You look nervous." Leonard's reply was a venomous whisper, full of contempt. But I caught every single word. "It's nothing, Dad. She's just being dramatic again. I had to put her in her place about the money. She'll get over it once she realizes she can't live without my credit card." Every single word was another nail hammered into the coffin of our marriage. This wasn't just an argument or a misunderstanding. This was how he truly saw me. A burden. A parasite. A woman who, in his twisted mind, couldn't survive without him. At that exact moment, my plan stopped being a mere lesson. It became a sentence. Veronica stepped into the kitchen. The silence that followed said more than any words ever could. I could imagine the scene without even moving, her eyes scanning the spotless white quartz counters, the dry, gleaming sink, the cold stove, the perfectly closed cabinets. Everything immaculate like a magazine photo but utterly lifeless. She had expected the scent of spices, the warmth of the oven, the bubbling of pots. Instead, she found sterile silence, the stark emptiness of a broken routine. I could almost feel her confusion, her mind racing to find a logical explanation. Maybe she thought the food was in the patio oven or that everything was ready and I was just waiting to serve. But that profound stillness had to be eating away at her reasoning. Then came the scream. It wasn't just a startled shriek. It was a roar of pure fury, a guttural sound that ripped through the air and shook the very walls of the house. It was the cry of a queen who had been defied, a matriarch who had not received her tribute. I heard the hurried footsteps of Leonard and Mr. Bennet rushing toward the kitchen. They entered to find Veronica standing dead center on the tiled floor I had chosen, her face crimson, one trembling finger pointing accusingly at the refrigerator. Her expression was a horrifying mix of rage and disbelief, as if she had discovered an act of treason instead of an empty kitchen. The show had reached its first climax. Leonard's face changed. Confusion gave way to blinding panic, then to a cold, venomous fury as his eyes finally met mine. I stood calmly in the doorway leading to the patio, watching everything with a composure that must have seemed inhuman to him. In my hands was my tablet, my work tool, that little drawing toy he used to mock. The lit screen cast a soft, ethereal glow over my face. The tension in the room was so thick you could practically taste it. Mr. Bennet looked from his wife to his son and back, trying to make some sense of the chaos. But Veronica didn't need explanations. To her, the culprit stood right before her eyes. Her small, dark pupils locked onto mine, burning with a fury that promised war. I knew without a shadow of a doubt, I was about to face the wrath of a woman who had never ever heard the word no. Before Leonard could stammer out an excuse or his father could intervene, Veronica drew a sharp breath and spoke in a tone that sliced through the air like a whip. "Would you care to explain what this means, Marianne?" she spat, each word dripping with disdain. "Is this supposed to be a joke? It's 1:15. Where's the lunch you were supposed to make?" The emphasis on supposed to said everything. To her, I wasn't family. I was staff. Her cook. Her hostess. Her guarantee of comfort. She didn't ask if I was okay if something had happened. She only demanded her meal, her routine, her absolute right to be served in my house. She was so utterly certain of her power over me that it never even crossed her mind that I might have a reason. Without saying a single word, I stepped forward. The silence in the room grew heavier, almost unbearable. I lifted my tablet and turned the screen toward them. The document I had prepared on Friday night glowed with professional precision. At the top, in an elegant font I had designed myself, the title read, "Invoice. Sunday Lunch Services." I let the image speak for itself. I saw confusion flicker on Mr. Bennet's face. Veronica's fury dissolved into bewildered disbelief. And pure, unadulterated terror flashed in Leonard's eyes. He and only he understood immediately what he was seeing. He had asked for financial clarity, and I was handing it to him on a silver platter. With a calm so cold it seemed to chill the very air, I raised the tablet higher, letting the bluish light of the screen wash over their stunned faces. The silence in the kitchen pressed against my ears. Mr. Bennet blinked repeatedly as if trying to focus on a reality that simply didn't make sense to him. Veronica, on the other hand, had gone from fiery anger to absolute confusion, so complete it seemed to have erased every single thought from her mind. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish out of water. But it was Leonard's face that stayed etched in my memory like a stark photograph. His skin waxy and pale, his features tight and drained of color. His eyes, fixed on the screen, held no anger, no wounded pride. Only raw, naked fear. The fear of a man watching the carefully built house of cards of his control collapse with one simple, silent breath of truth. Veronica was the first to break the silence. She did it with a laugh, a sharp, hollow sound. It wasn't sincere or amused, but the nervous reflex of someone desperately trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping irrevocably away. "Oh please, Marianne. What a silly joke," she said, feigning calm. "Come on now. Stop the theatrics. Turn that thing off and tell us what you've prepared for lunch. You must be hiding it somewhere to surprise us." She even took a step toward me with that forced, condescending smile she used whenever she wanted to remind everyone who she thought was in charge. She lifted her hand to pat my arm, almost maternal. But I didn't move. Her hand met only empty air. Her smile vanished instantly. My eyes never left hers. It's not a joke, Veronica, I said slowly, my voice sounding strangely foreign, as if it didn't belong in that house, as if it were the voice of an executive in a boardroom, not a wife in her own kitchen. I spoke with the precise articulation of someone presenting a report. As Leonard proposed on Friday, we've implemented a complete separation of budgets. And since family event catering was not part of our original agreement, it is now billed separately. The standard rate is $350 and includes menu planning, the purchase of high-quality ingredients, 6 hours of labor at a private chef's rate in New York City, table service and post-meal cleanup. Every word was cold, calculated, stripped of emotion. I was speaking their language. Money, numbers, transactions. The only language they truly respected. That's when Leonard finally reacted, not with words, but with a violent, desperate movement. He took a long, lunging step toward me, trying to snatch the tablet from my hands, as if destroying it could somehow erase the reality displayed on its screen. That's enough, Marianne. Give me that, he growled, his voice low and thick with barely restrained rage. What do you think you're doing? You're embarrassing us in front of my parents. His fury was predictable. I had anticipated it. I calmly stepped back, keeping the tablet safely out of his reach. I looked him straight in the eye without a trace of fear. The woman who used to shrink at his shouting was gone. In her place stood an unshakable stillness, a cool, unwavering calm that unsettled him even more than the invoice itself. Ridiculous, I said softly but sharply. Let me explain what's really ridiculous, Leonard. Ridiculous was you standing in this very room, telling me my comfortable life at your expense was over. Ridiculous is that you said it while standing on a floor I paid for, in a kitchen where every appliance was bought with my money, inside a house whose down payment, 80% of it, came directly from my grandmother's inheritance. Each word landed like a hammer blow. The impact was immediate. Mr. Bennett took a distinct step back, looking at his son with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. The carefully constructed story they had built for years, that of the model son heroically supporting his artist wife, crumbled to dust. Mentioning the inheritance was breaking a sacred taboo. Everyone knew it existed, but no one dared speak of it aloud. Veronica looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I was no longer just the insolent daughter-in-law. I was now a direct threat to her pride and the family's carefully curated reputation. You ungrateful woman, she hissed. After everything we've done for you, we gave you a name, a place, a family. She tried to deploy her old weapons. Guilt, shame, the crushing weight of the status she believed she had generously bestowed upon me. But those bullets bounced harmlessly off the armor of truth and self-respect I had finally donned. Without a word, I turned around slowly, deliberately, almost theatrically. I walked to the refrigerator, the one now filled with my neatly labeled items, and opened the door. The interior light illuminated a small army of tags bearing my name. It was a powerful image, the tangible symbol of my newly claimed independence. I took out a bottle of sparkling water, one of the expensive ones Leonard used to call a useless luxury. When I opened it, the hiss of carbonation sounded loud and defiant in the quiet kitchen. I took a long sip, keeping my eyes fixed on them. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The message was as clear as the glass of water I was drinking. This is my space. These are my things. And I decide what happens here. My silence was my declaration of war. The calm on my face seemed to finally break something inside Leonard. His expression twisted into a horrifying mix of fury and profound humiliation. He had lost control of the scene, of the audience, and most importantly, of me. Desperate to reclaim it, he resorted to his last pathetic weapon, a threat. This ends now, Marianne, he said, his voice trembling, barely holding it together. You're going to turn off that damn tablet, apologize to my parents for this circus, and start cooking something, or I swear you'll pack your things and get out of my house right now. The words "my house" echoed hollowly. It was his final, pathetic attempt to assert an authority he no longer possessed. I turned slowly to face him, still holding the cold bottle in my hand, as cold as my resolve. A small, steady smile, not mocking, just utterly sure, appeared on my lips. I looked straight into his eyes, those eyes I had once loved, but that now reflected only the fear of a stranger, and let the silence stretch before shattering his threat with surgical calm. Allow me to correct you, Leonard, I said in a low, precise voice. It's not your house. It's mostly mine. My inheritance money is legally recorded in the purchase. I dropped that truth into the kitchen like a bomb. The silence that followed was explosive. I saw realization dawn on Veronica's and Mr. Bennett's faces. They finally understood they weren't looking at a rebellious wife. They were standing in front of the rightful owner of the house they were in. Leonard was speechless. His threat collapsed at his feet, utterly deflated. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had flipped completely. I finished my water in one steady sip and added just as calmly, the offer still stands. $400 for the lunch service. Or if you prefer, we can start negotiating a rental agreement. I can draft it right now. I paused, then added with restrained irony, that of course is also a billable service. My words hung in the air before settling. The shock seemed to absorb all the oxygen from the room. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, charged with the stark reality we were all facing. Veronica stared at me, eyes wide, her face shifting from disbelief to a rage so deep it seemed unable to escape her throat. Mr. Bennet stood motionless, his gaze fixed on me, not disapproving anymore but calculating as if reassessing a failed investment. Leonard was pale, almost translucent, as though my revelation hadn't just shattered his argument, but had drained the very life from him. He stood there in the middle of my kitchen like a ghost, lost in the wreckage of his own disaster. Veronica was the first to explode as expected, though her anger no longer carried the force it once had. It sounded like a storm that had lost its center. "You manipulative liar," she spat, though her voice lacked its usual command. "How dare you talk to us about money, about contracts? This is my son's house," she added, looking around as if that alone could reassert her power. "You've poisoned his mind," she went on, clinging desperately to her old script, the one where she was the queen and I was the ungrateful servant. But now her words rang hollow, desperate, like blanks fired against a wall of concrete. The power she had wielded for years, built on guilt, duty and shame, had utterly evaporated the moment I confronted her fantasies with the hard facts of financial reality. I ignored her. She was no longer my focus. I turned my gaze to her husband, the quiet, pragmatic foundation of all that family's authority. I looked him straight in the eyes, a calm rising from deep within me. "Mr. Bennet," I said evenly, "you're a businessman. You understand assets, liabilities, returns, and investments. My grandmother left me an inheritance, and with that money I paid for 80% of the down payment on this property. Leonard contributed the remaining 20%, and his salary covers part of the mortgage, while my income as a designer pays for maintenance and all household expenses." I paused, keeping my voice impeccably professional. "Tell me, as a man of numbers, do you think it's fair that the majority shareholder of this asset be treated as an unpaid employee?" I was speaking his language. The language of tangible value, of numbers that leave no room for debate. Mr. Bennet didn't answer right away. His eyes shifted from me to his son, and for an instant, I saw a flicker of genuine disappointment cross his face. Then he turned toward his wife, whose expression was tight, distorted by frustration. Finally he looked back at me. His eyes no longer held disdain but something new, a cool assessment, almost a quiet respect. He didn't say a word, but his silence was the clearest response. In the court of logic and facts, the case was closed. It wasn't a victory for me. It was a sentence for Leonard. His father, with that silence, had just confirmed everything I'd said, and that utterly destroyed him. I saw him deflate like the air leaving a balloon. The arrogance, the fury, the pride, all of it vanished, leaving behind only a hollow sadness. He ran a hand through his hair, desperately avoiding my gaze and his parents'. "That's enough, Marianne," he whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible. "You won. That's what you wanted, isn't it? You won. You ruined Sunday. You ruined everything." It wasn't an apology. It was the whine of a child blaming someone else for breaking a toy he had already smashed himself. He blamed me for revealing the truth, not realizing that he was the one who had built the lie. To Leonard, my act of independence was an act of destruction. I slowly shook my head, and a shadow of genuine sadness passed through me. "I didn't ruin anything, Leonard," I said quietly. "I just held up a mirror. What you saw in it was already broken long ago. The only difference is that today I decided to stop pretending I didn't see the cracks." I walked calmly to the kitchen island and set my tablet down on the quartz counter, the same place where my plan had begun. My work tool, the one he used to belittle as my little drawing toy, now rested motionless, its purpose fulfilled. The invoice still glowed on the screen like a digital epitaph for our marriage, for everything it had been until that day. I took my phone from my pocket. "And since we're all so intent on treating everything as business," I said, looking directly at Veronica, "allow me one last professional gesture." I dialed a number I knew by heart. A voice answered immediately. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "Good afternoon," I replied in a polite, almost cheerful tone. "I'd like to confirm a reservation for 3 people under the name Veronica Bennet." "Yes, that's right. For lunch. Could it be on the terrace?" "Perfect. Thank you very much." I hung up and looked at them. Their faces were a portrait of utter confusion. "I've reserved a table for you at one of the most exclusive restaurants on the Upper East Side," I said evenly. It's a gift from me. Consider it compensation for the inconvenience, and for the catering service not provided today. It wasn't a gesture of peace. It was a gesture of power. An elegant dismissal. I was offering them luxury, the very same luxury they had always used to underline their superiority. But this time it came from me not as a plea but as a statement of hierarchy. The silence that followed was so deep I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. Veronica opened her mouth but no sound came out. Mr. Bennet watched me with a complicated expression, part surprise, part faint amusement as if recognizing a master stroke. Leonard, on the other hand, sank further into his defeat. I hadn't beaten him with shouting or tears, but with precision, with a calculated courtesy that left him utterly unarmed with no way out. He had lost on his own battlefield. Power and status. We're not going anywhere. Veronica stammered finally, looking frantically to her husband for backup. Charles, for heaven's sake, say something. Do something. But for the first time in all the years I'd known them, Mr. Bennet didn't side with her. He shook his head slowly with a finality that left no doubt. Let's go, Veronica, he said, his voice calm but firm. I think Marianne has made herself perfectly clear. It was the final devastating blow. The patriarch, the silent judge, had just delivered his verdict, and it wasn't in favor of his own blood. He had chosen reason over loyalty, truth over pretense. Veronica's face crumbled. In seconds she seemed to age 10 years. She had been betrayed by her son who hadn't defended the family's honor, and abandoned by her husband who refused to fight a lost war. With clumsy movements she grabbed her designer purse, the ridiculous symbol of a status that no longer existed, and without even looking at me walked past toward the front door. Mr. Bennet followed her but paused in the doorway. He looked at me for a long moment and gave a small nod. It wasn't an apology or approval. It was an acknowledgement between equals. Then he left, closing the door with a soft final click. The echo of that sound lingered in the air, marking the end of one act and the uncertain beginning of another. Only Leonard and I remained in the silent house. He hadn't moved. He stood there in the middle of the kitchen, shoulders slumped, staring at the empty space his parents had just left behind. After a while he finally lifted his head. His eyes no longer held anger, only confusion, loss, and the dawning, bitter understanding of what had just happened. The war with his parents had ended in total surrender. But the one between us had only just begun. And for the first time in the profound silence of my kitchen, I felt ready for it. Leonard still stood there, motionless, turned to stone, frozen in place, a statue amidst the ruins of his own kingdom. The silence his parents left behind was heavier than any scream. I watched him for a few seconds, waiting for a reaction, a word, something to break the stillness, but nothing came. He finally sat down on one of the stools at the island, the same one where he had given me his ultimatum 2 nights earlier, and buried his face in his hands. There was no anger left in his posture, only the crushing weight of total defeat. And in that instant I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction. What filled me instead was a deep, quiet emptiness. The recognition that the man I had once loved no longer existed, if he ever truly had. In front of me wasn't a husband, but a stranger sitting in my kitchen, mourning not the loss of his partner but the loss of his audience. That night we didn't speak a word. I took my pillow and a blanket and settled into the guest room, the same one I used as my office. Closing that door was more final than any argument. It was the physical wall that symbolized the emotional barrier he had built for years. The next morning when I came downstairs he was already gone for work. On the quartz countertop lay a note in his rushed handwriting. We need to talk. I didn't read the rest. I crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. We had talked enough. Now was time to act. I spent the day contacting attorney Julia Harper, a brilliant lawyer specializing in real estate and divorce cases, recommended by one of my clients. The conversation was clear, direct, and surprisingly liberating. For the first time I was planning for my future, not ours. A week later I met Leonard, not at the house but in the neutral setting of a coffee shop. I handed him a folder. It contained a copy of the property deed, bank statements showing the transfer of my inheritance money for the down payment, and a detailed proposal for asset division. Everything was organized into clean, precise spreadsheets, as meticulous as the invoice I had once shown his mother. I watched as he read. His face turned pale. In those cold black and white numbers, the fiction that he had been the sole provider completely collapsed. Every figure was a mirror reflecting a truth he could no longer deny. Marianne, please, he whispered, finally looking up. We can fix this. I promise I'll change. I'll set boundaries with my mother. I'll do anything. His promises sounded hollow. Echoes from a past that no longer had a place in my life. The relationship with his parents disintegrated in the most predictable way. Veronica tried calling me a dozen times the next day, alternating between furious voicemails and falsely conciliatory messages. I didn't answer any of them. I blocked her number and Mr. Bennett's too. A few days later I received an email from him. It was brief and formal. "We regret what happened on Sunday. Leonard has explained the financial side. We hope you can resolve your matters in the best way possible." It wasn't an apology. It was a strategic withdrawal. They knew they had lost their access, their influence, their privileges. They were cutting their losses. I never heard from them again. And their absence felt like opening a window after years of breathing stale air. The fate of the house, that supposed nest of love that had become my gilded cage, was resolved with the same cold efficiency as everything else. On my lawyer's advice, I gave Leonard two options. He could buy out my share of the property, which would mean securing a mortgage for nearly 80% of its current market value. Or we could sell and split the profit according to our documented contributions. Of course, he couldn't afford the first option. His salary, though decent, wasn't enough to sustain the illusion of luxury he loved to project, not without my capital. Reluctantly, he agreed to sell. Watching him sign the papers in front of Mr. Robert Thompson, the realtor, was the true end of our marriage. There were no tears, no shouting, only the quiet sound of a pen signing the close of a story. 2 weeks later, while I was in a client meeting, he moved out. When I returned, half the closets were empty. His personal things were gone. On the countertop, he left his keys and a note. "I'm sorry." I never knew what he was truly sorry for. Humiliating me? Destroying our marriage? Or simply for being caught? Through a mutual friend, I later heard he'd moved into a small apartment near his office. Functional. Charmless. Cramped. His comfortable life was over, but not at my expense. It had simply collapsed under its own weight. He wanted separate budgets and ended up with a separate life. The house sold quickly in New York City's competitive market. On closing day, I received a transfer large enough to guarantee not just security but profound freedom. With part of that money, I rented a beautiful loft in Soho, brick walls, large windows and warm light flooding my new space. A space that now proudly reads, Marianne Carter Design Studio. The rest I invested, carefully following Grandma Teresa's advice. Build your independence, not someone else's. My business began to thrive. Without Sunday lunches, without the constant draining pressure to seek approval that never came, my creativity took flight. I landed major clients, ambitious projects. What had once been merely my hobby became a solid, successful company. Now, when I sit in my studio with my tablet on my lap, I sometimes think about that white quartz kitchen, not with bitterness but with quiet gratitude. It was the stage of my greatest humiliation, yes. But also my magnificent liberation. These days I cook only for pleasure. I invite friends who genuinely enjoy my food and fill my home with laughter instead of criticism. Leonard, Veronica, and Mr. Bennett are just characters in a distant story, shadows of another life. I wish them no harm. I simply wish them nothing at all. They occupy zero space in my present. The life I have now. I designed it myself. With my own rules, my own colors, my own rhythm. Friday nights are no longer something I dread but something I celebrate. Sometimes I order my favorite food. Other times I open a bottle of wine and work late on a project I'm passionate about simply because I want to. I look around at this space that is entirely mine, built with my work and my effort. And I finally understand what true wealth really means. It's not in a huge house or a 3-course dinner. It's in the quiet peace of living by your own rules. My name no longer appears on makeshift labels inside a refrigerator. It's engraved on my studio door, on my invoices, on my project contracts, and on the contract of my happiness. That's a value no one can ever measure or take away. If I learned anything from this whirlwind, it's that your worth is not an opinion others get to debate. It's not measured by a husband's approval, a mother-in-law's praise, or anyone else's validation. It is a fact. For years, I allowed their perception of me to define my own. I let their blindness make me disappear. Their criticism convinced me I wasn't enough. I used to think that if I just tried harder, cooked better, kept the house spotless, they would finally see my worth. But the problem was never my effort. The problem was their inability to recognize it. The greatest lesson wasn't teaching them my value. It was reminding myself of it. The irony is that Leonard was right about one thing. It was time to end the comfortable life at someone else's expense. He just picked the wrong person. The comfortable life was his, built on my inheritance, sustained by my invisible labor and decorated with my emotional energy. He and his parents had been enjoying the benefits of a partnership where only one partner paid the full price. My story isn't unique. Millions of women around the world are silent partners in their own lives, contributing invisible capital, time, energy, love, organization, assets that never appear on any balance sheet. Yet without them everything would collapse. That invoice I showed on my tablet was never really about $350. It was a statement of principles. A boundary I should have drawn long before. Putting a price on my work was never about getting rich. It was my way of making it explicitly clear that what I do isn't free. Sometimes, the only way to make people truly understand the value of what you do is to show them the cost of not having it. Boundaries aren't walls to keep others out. They're lines we draw to protect ourselves, to teach the world how we deserve to be treated. And the hardest, most vital lesson is this. You are the one who must hold that pencil. No one else will draw the line for you. True strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it reveals itself in the quiet certainty of a firm decision. My power didn't come from conflict. It was born in the deep calm of that Friday night when his humiliation met not my tears, but my smile. We live in a society that teaches women to defend themselves through emotion, to cry, to beg, to explain. But there is immense power and logic in serenity, in using the very tools of the system that tries to hold you down to set yourself free. My tablet, that little drawing toy he once mocked, became my sword. My knowledge of home management and finances became my shield. I didn't need to raise my voice. I simply presented the facts. And facts, unlike opinions, are not up for debate. And if you, listening to my story right now, have ever felt invisible, underestimated, or taken for granted, I want you to know something important. Your work, your effort, your time matter. Even if no one else is keeping count. Don't wait for humiliation to start valuing what you do. Start today. Make a mental list of everything you contribute. Every task, every detail you keep running without recognition. Be your own accountant. Acknowledge your invisible capital, because the first step toward earning others' respect is respecting yourself with a conviction that doesn't break for anyone. Your peace, your dignity, and your energy are priceless, and you don't need anyone's permission to claim them. My story found its ending, one that I wrote, produced, and financed myself. But I know there are thousands like mine still being written, stories unfolding every day in kitchens, offices, and living rooms across the world. Mine ended with the sale of a house. But in truth, it began with the purchase of my freedom. And that's an investment that never loses its value. Today my life isn't perfect, but it's entirely mine. And that ownership, the ownership of my independence, is the only one that truly matters. Have you ever had to put a price on your peace just to make someone understand its worth? If my story about how I turned a kitchen into a boardroom and an invoice into a declaration of independence resonated with you, leave me a comment and tell me your experience. I genuinely love to hear it. And if, like me, you believe that every woman deserves for her value to be recognized and never discounted, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Together we can make sure that more stories of women who stopped serving dinner and started serving justice are finally heard. Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.